I woke up that spring morning with a sense of contentment. The sun gleamed through the half-open blinds, filtering warm light into my living room. Downstairs, in the underground parking area, my bicycle leaned snugly against the communal rack, my faithful companion for morning rides. Our suburban condo complex boasted the usual suburban charm: modest greenery, tidy sidewalks, and a vigilant homeowners association, or HOA. I'd moved from Chicago to this place in Colorado for a quieter life. However, quiet was relative. Our HOA was famous for imposing rules, mostly small ones about paint colors, fence heights, and what time to haul trash bins back from the curb. Nothing I couldn't handle. I'd grown used to the bureaucratic notices, the official phone calls, and the seasonal newsletters. So, when I brewed my coffee and saw the bright yellow flyer pinned to the community bulletin board in the hallway, I thought it would just be another routine announcement. A single headline screamed at me in bold capital letters: "Notice of proposed bicycle rack relocation." The notice stated that due to unsightly clutter and potential fire hazard, the HOA board was considering moving the bike racks to a designated lot at the far end of the property. The reasons felt flimsy to me. Our underground parking lot was spacious, and the bikes were parked in an orderly fashion. The distant lot was half a mile away, inconvenient to say the least. In that moment, I felt the first prickling of concern. The bottom of the notice bore the signature of our HOA's new vice president, Barbara Armistead, though people often muttered among themselves that she was the biggest meddler in the neighborhood, always up in everyone's business. My neighbor, Fred, had taken to calling her Karen, referencing the online trope for overbearing, self-entitled personalities. The name stuck. Clutching the flyer, I headed to the underground parking. A few neighbors were there, puzzling over the same announcement. Rena, a physician's assistant and fellow cyclist, scowled at the mention of the new policy. Donald, a retired engineer who rode his bike daily for exercise, shook his head in disbelief. We chatted in hushed tones about the inconvenience, hoping it was a passing fancy. Yet something told me this proposal was more than a passing fancy. It was the work of one woman bent on sculpting the complex to fit her narrow vision. That evening, I had to attend an HOA meeting. Ordinarily, these gatherings were staid affairs with lukewarm coffee, a plate of stale cookies, and a sea of mildly interested residents. But that night, the tension in the community center was palpable. People spoke in muffled tones, flipping through their copies of the newly distributed agenda, which featured the dreaded item: bike rack relocation. Barbara, Karen, was there, exuding the self-confident poise of someone who believed in her crusade. She was in her early 50s, with coiffed hair that never seemed out of place. Her posture was rigid, and her eyes swept across the room. She greeted people by name, but each salutation carried an unmistakable air of superiority. It was the posture of a woman who knew she had influence in the HOA and intended to wield it. The board convened at the front table, tapping a gavel to hush the room. The usual business rolled by: approvals of last meeting's minutes, a quick budget update, until the president nodded to Barbara. "We have a new proposal to discuss," he said. Barbara cleared her throat, voice cutting through the small talk like a blade. "Thank you, everyone, for coming. I will address the concerns I've recently raised about the bikes in the underground parking facility. We have had a growing number of complaints," she paused for effect, casting a sweeping gaze over the crowd, "about the unsightly buildup of bikes. Some are never moved and collect dust. Others might be a hazard in case of an emergency. I propose we transfer these racks to the east edge of the property near the storage sheds." A ripple of murmurs spread across the audience. My mind raced. Unsightly buildup. Our bikes were lined up tidily, and as for hazard, I'd never seen so much as a stray handlebar blocking a passage. Across the table, Rena looked ready to stand up and protest. Donald's knuckles whitened from clenching his own copy of the proposal. One of the board members raised a hand. "Barbara, is there documentation of these complaints?" She smiled, revealing teeth that might have glowed in the fluorescent light. "Absolutely. I've received half a dozen phone calls and 2 emails in the last quarter alone. It's become enough of a nuisance that I felt it crucial to bring the issue to the board." She folded her arms, looking smug. I tried to keep my composure, though I felt a swell of anger rise in me. It was obvious Karen was behind this, and half a dozen phone calls hardly constituted an epidemic. Still, her posture, her tone. This was a person who got her way by leaning on the veneer of official HOA process. I realized then that this was only the beginning of the battle. She had staked her claim with the board, and if we did nothing, the bikes would be banished from the convenient parking area we'd always relied upon. After that tense meeting, I lingered by the refreshments, scanning the room for allies. Rena approached me, jaw set with determination. "She's exaggerating," she said, crossing her arms. "Nobody I know has any real complaints about the bikes. But the board might listen to her, especially if she's greasing the wheels behind the scenes." I sighed, folding the flyer in my hand. I cycle to work at least 3 times a week. It saves me gas, and I like the exercise. If they move the racks half a mile away, it'd kill the convenience. Isn't that the point of communal facilities, to encourage people to stay active and reduce traffic? Rena nodded, her frustration mirroring my own. Absolutely. This is something we can't let pass without a fight. We should gather everyone who relies on those racks regularly and show we're the majority. I looked around the community room. Donald was deep in conversation with another cyclist who sometimes used the rack. A few other people, mostly residents who prided themselves on healthy living, had overheard Rena and me. They drifted closer, forming a loose circle of neighbors united in alarm. We exchanged contact information and pledged to meet for coffee the next morning. Just an informal talk about what we could do. Rena suggested we form a group or draft a petition. I agreed, though I'd never been one for confrontations. Yet seeing the relief on people's faces made me realize that if we didn't stand up to Karen, we'd watch the HOA rummage through our convenience and discard it without a second thought. That night, I crawled into bed far later than usual, mind abuzz with ideas. I felt a pang of doubt. What if Barbara was more powerful than we realized? She seemed so well connected, always at the side of the HOA president. But my instincts told me that if we united the cyclists and appealed to the rest of the community, people who might not bike themselves but supported the principle, we could stand a chance. I drifted into restless sleep, picturing a row of lonely bicycles exiled to a desolate corner of the property under the watchful, disapproving gaze of the neighborhood's self-appointed Karen. The next morning, I met Rena and Donald at a small cafe on the edge of our town. We settled into a booth, coffee cups steaming between us, and dove straight in to talk about the bike racks. "We should do more than just gather signatures," Rena said. "We need a clear message that relocating the bikes is against our community's best interests. The board loves official-sounding data. Maybe we can back it up with facts, health benefits, environmental impact, and so on." Donald nodded. "I could do a little research. Show them statistics about how cycling improves cardiovascular health, how it cuts down on parking congestion. Maybe we can highlight the possibility of rising theft if the bikes are stored in a remote area." I felt a surge of enthusiasm. What if we formed an official group, some kind of neighborhood cycling club? That way, we're not just random residents complaining. We're an established organization with a mission. Then we can approach the board as a collective. Rena's eyes lit up. "Yes, let's call it Cycling for Health, or something along those lines. That name hits on the positives. People can't argue with the idea of improving health." And just like that, Cycling for Health was born. We spent an hour drafting a short mission statement and listing potential members. Donald offered to compile relevant statistics, while Rena said she'd connect with her medical colleagues for any formal endorsements. I volunteered to create a quick online sign-up form and email it to everyone we knew in the complex. By the time we left, the morning sun high in the sky, we had the bones of a grassroots campaign. I felt proud and energized. For too long, I'd let the HOA's small but growing demands pass unchallenged. Now I realized that it only took a push, like Karen's overreaching, to unite people around a cause. Yes, it was just about bikes, but it was also about our quality of life and a sense of communal fairness. Over the following days, word about Cycling for Health spread quickly. I discovered we weren't the only regular riders in the neighborhood. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to stopped me by the mailboxes to ask about the group and how they could help. Some families with small children, though not daily commuters, favored keeping the racks in the underground parking because it was safer, away from traffic and weather. Donald compiled a tidy fact sheet, complete with bullet points. Health benefits. Cycling helps reduce stress, improve cardiovascular function, and maintain a healthy weight. Environmental impact. Fewer cars on the road means lower emissions, reinforcing our suburbs' green initiatives. Convenience and security. The current rack location is protected from harsh weather and potential theft. Moving it to a remote lot would increase risks. Community building. The bike rack and cycling group foster neighborly interaction and encourage physical fitness. Rena, meanwhile, convinced her clinic to provide a short testimonial endorsing local efforts to promote active lifestyles. She even printed a letter on official letterhead, which made an impression. Other cyclists contributed stories, how easy access to the bikes helped them stay consistent with exercise routines, or how they shared bikes with their children for weekend rides. That weekend, we arranged a small open-air gathering in the parking lot near the bike rack, like a friendly meet and greet for the Cycling for Health group. We brewed coffee in travel containers, brought a folding table, and invited curious neighbors. We ended up chatting for hours in a lively circle. People exchanged phone numbers, offered each other safety tips, and expressed solidarity in the face of Barbara's proposal. At one point, an older couple arrived, George and Martha, who admitted they didn't cycle anymore. Still, they signed our petition, saying, "We believe in preserving convenience and encouraging exercise for younger folks. Don't let Barbara run things on her own." Their support felt like a small victory, a nod that even non-cyclists saw the bigger picture. Standing in that circle, I realized we were forging more than just a protest group. We were building a real community, a cluster of neighbors determined not to be bullied by overbearing HOA tactics. It was an empowering feeling, one I had never fully experienced. Word reached Karen fast. Her posture at the next HOA meeting was tighter than ever, shoulders squared, lips pressed in a thin line. She had that peculiar ability to find out everything happening in the neighborhood, who was meeting whom, who was complaining, who was leading any form of organized dissent. One Monday morning, an official-looking letter arrived in my mailbox. It bore the HOA's letterhead but was clearly drafted by Barbara. It cited community guidelines for forming unofficial organizations and requested that any activist groups coordinate with the HOA board before hosting gatherings in common spaces. I stared at the letter, mouth agape. This was the parking garage we all paid dues for. Why on earth would we need the HOA's pre-approval to have an informal chat there? It was obvious that Barbara was trying to intimidate us, or at least slow us down by drowning us in formalities. I invited Rena and Donald over to my place that evening to discuss. Donald read the letter twice, eyebrows inching higher each time. "This is typical bureaucratic bullying," he said. "They can't forbid you from using the property you pay for. They're just trying to scare you." Rena agreed. "I see this in medical boards sometimes. Someone flexes the rules to make you feel you're stepping out of line. But if we carefully check the actual bylaws, we might find we're not violating anything." We pulled out the HOA handbook and combed through it over pizza. Sure enough, there was no explicit clause requiring formal approval for resident gatherings unless we planned to block off areas or host events exceeding 50 attendees. We were nowhere near that threshold. Before the evening was over, I typed up a polite but firm email reply, attaching the relevant pages of the bylaws. We let Barbara know that, respectfully, Cycling for Health was a low-impact, neighborly group that did not require prior authorization, as it did not infringe on any official HOA regulations. I hit send with a jolt of satisfaction, imagining the look on Karen's face when she realized her official warning had fallen flat. If she thought we'd back down quietly, she had seriously underestimated us. Over the next week, the tension in the neighborhood thickened. Some residents whispered that Karen had approached them individually, suggesting they distance themselves from our group. Others said she questioned the safety of congregating cyclists near the parking garage. A rumor emerged that she wanted to impose new cycling rules, such as mandatory registration of each bicycle, fees for bike storage, or even fines for leaving unsightly accessories on bikes, like baskets or child seats. It was as though Barbara was ramping up a personal vendetta. The more we resisted, the more she escalated her tactics. She began circulating a flyer of her own, highlighting alleged risks of keeping bikes in the garage. The flyer was peppered with half-truths, mentioning potential structural damage from bicycle collisions, referencing an obscure city fire code she vaguely claimed was violated by storing flammable rubber tires in a confined space. Our group responded swiftly, debunking each claim point by point. Structural damage. The underground columns were designed to withstand far more stress than a row of stationary bicycles. Fire code. We reached out to the local fire marshal, who confirmed that properly stored bicycles did not violate any code. Security. We showed that the lit, camera-monitored garage was actually one of the safest places to keep bikes. Every time Karen tried to stir up fear, we countered with facts. Yet it was exhausting. I spent countless evenings emailing or calling neighbors, reassuring them we weren't appending the community or ignoring safety. I started losing sleep, anxious that the HOA board might side with Barbara if she piled on enough claims. Rena admitted to feeling the stress, too, juggling her job at the clinic with this unexpected activism. Still, we pressed on, because for every rumor Karen spread, we discovered that more neighbors, often quietly, were on our side. They thanked us for clarifying the facts, for standing up for reasonable communal rights. Even some board members, off the record, confessed that Barbara was getting out of hand. In the midst of this brewing battle, I found an unlikely ally. Jorge, who worked at the real estate agency that first sold me my condo, approached me after I circulated an email about cycling for health. He asked if we could chat over lunch. We met at a local sandwich shop. Over turkey subs, Jorge explained that he'd once served on the HOA board. He'd stepped down a year prior due to frustration with what he called board politics. When I pressed him for details, he lowered his voice. "It's not just about the bikes," he said. "Barbara, Karen, has wanted to leave her mark on this neighborhood for a while. She's tried rewriting landscaping guidelines, restricting how many planters people can keep on their balconies. She thrives on control. The bikes are just her latest project." I nodded, remembering the small battles I'd witnessed, how Karen had insisted on uniform curtains visible from the street, or how she once lectured a neighbor for installing a bird feeder that didn't match the HOA's aesthetic. Jorge took a sip of iced tea. "She's been pushing the relocation for weeks behind the scenes. The board president, Roger, tends to avoid conflict. Barbara uses that to her advantage. If she frames something as a big complaint, he'd rather approve it than endure drawn-out disputes." It all clicked. Barbara's method was to inflate a minor issue until the board, eager to maintain harmony, complied with her demands. But this time, she was facing residents who wouldn't back down, who had formed a united front. Jorge encouraged me to continue gathering signatures and testimonies. "You need to show the board that ignoring your group will cause more conflict than giving in to Barbara. It's the only way they'll stand up to her." I thanked him for his insight. Walking out of the sandwich shop, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Knowing Barbara's history of micromanagement and the board's reluctance to push back gave me a clearer strategy. We had to demonstrate that our voices outnumbered and outweighed Karen's endless complaints. Armed with Jorge's advice, we went full throttle on the petition. Our online sign-up form expanded daily as neighbors added their names. Some wrote heartfelt comments about their reliance on the bikes for daily errands or commuting to work. Others, though they didn't cycle, explained how they believed in supporting a healthy, environmentally conscious way of life. Donald took the data, dozens, then over 100 signatures, and crafted a clean, concise petition. The final version opened with a brief statement. "We, the undersigned residents of this community, respectfully request the HOA board to vote against any proposal to relocate or restrict bicycle storage in our underground parking lot. We believe the current system benefits the majority of residents, encourages health and sustainability, and has not presented any significant safety hazards." We appended all the names and included a detailed section addressing Barbara's safety claims. The final page featured Rena's medical endorsement and a short note from the local fire marshal's office confirming no code violations. The day before the next HOA meeting, Rena, Donald, and I showed up at the HOA office to formally submit the petition. The office assistant gave us a knowing smile, clearly aware of the friction. "I'll be sure the board reviews this ahead of tomorrow's meeting," she said. Walking out, I exhaled deeply. We'd done everything by the book, organized, documented, and respectful. Now, it was up to the board to weigh our evidence against Barbara's persistent complaints. Did we have enough sway to make them balk at her demands? Only time would tell. When the night of the meeting arrived, the community center was full to bursting. Word had spread that Cycling for Health would present its petition. Dozens of neighbors came, some wearing workout clothes or cycling jerseys in a show of solidarity. Barbara was already seated at the front table beside the HOA president, arms crossed and jaw tight. Roger, the president, began the proceedings. His voice was noticeably strained. He must have sensed the tension in the crowd. Routine matters rolled by quickly. Minutes approved, finances stable, landscaping budget untouched. Then we reached the agenda item, bike rack relocation proposal. Barbara launched into her usual speech, reiterating concerns about aesthetics and safety, citing anonymous complaints, and warning of fires or thefts. In the back rows, people fidgeted, some shaking their heads. Her tone was sharper than ever, as if doubling down to maintain control. When she finished, Roger cleared his throat. "We have received a petition from the residents group Cycling for Health," he said, holding up a stack of papers. "I believe," he paused, scanning the faces in the audience. "I believe many of you are here to support this group." At that, Donald stood up to speak. "Thank you, Mr. President. We've collected over 100 signatures from neighbors who oppose relocating the bike racks. We've addressed every claim of structural or fire hazard with official documentation. We've also highlighted the health benefits and security advantages of the current setup." As Donald spoke, I observed Barbara's expression. She stared straight ahead, not meeting anyone's eyes, her face stony. Rena stood next. "I'm a physician's assistant, and my clinic endorses local cycling initiatives for better public health. There's absolutely no medical reason to limit bike usage or storage, especially in a well-ventilated, monitored garage. If anything, we should be encouraging more of it." She handed a copy of her endorsement to the board members, who flipped through it with interest. A wave of applause erupted from the audience. People began chiming in, one after another, affirming how helpful and convenient the underground bike racks were. Fred, an older neighbor, recounted how his granddaughter visited on weekends and rode her bike around the safe perimeter of the property. Others expressed frustration that Barbara was focusing on trivial disruptions rather than meaningful improvements. Finally, it was my turn. My heart pounded, but I steadied my voice. "We're not trying to cause trouble. We simply want the HOA to recognize that the overwhelming majority of residents find the bike racks beneficial and safe right where they are." Roger looked from me to Barbara, then back to the petition in his hand. "We appreciate the thoroughness of your group's effort. We'll open the floor to board discussion." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then one board member raised his hand. "Speaking honestly, I haven't seen any evidence that truly justifies relocating the racks. The petition is convincing." Another agreed. "Yes, and I'm inclined to respect the will of the community unless we have a clear and present danger, which doesn't seem to be the case." Barbara stiffened, color rising in her cheeks. "We must not yield to emotional pleas," she snapped. "We have a responsibility to keep this complex neat and safe. I have proof of complaints." Roger lifted a conciliatory hand. "Yes, Barbara, we appreciate your diligence. But we also must consider the broader community. The board will deliberate now." With that, he called for an official vote. My breath caught in my throat. The board members voted one by one, for no's, and only Barbara's single yes. The proposal to relocate the bike racks was struck down. A cheer broke out among the residents. I exhaled and found my friends in the crowd, Donald and Rena, beaming. Even some of the board members looked relieved. Meanwhile, Barbara shook her head, eyes flashing with frustration. In that moment, I realized that while we'd scored a major victory, this would not be the last time Karen tried to push her agenda. The next day, the underground parking was buzzing with activity. Residents who hadn't attended the meeting texted each other the results. The communal mood was festive. Our group's collective action had made a real difference. People chatted about how they might decorate their bicycles, whether we should organize monthly rides, or if there might be a future kids' bike safety clinic. Yet not everyone was so pleased. Barbara stormed through the hallways, ignoring friendly greetings. One of her neighbors overheard her ranting on the phone, complaining that the board had become spineless under community pressure. Some rumored that she threatened to call city inspectors to dig up any code violations she could find. A few nights later, I bumped into her near the main entrance. It was awkward. We locked eyes as I was retrieving my mail. She pursed her lips before speaking in a clipped tone. "Congratulations on your little campaign. I hope it doesn't set a precedent for more rule breaking." I took a breath, trying to stay civil. "We didn't break any rules, Barbara. We followed the bylaws and the community's wishes." It was a democratic process. She clenched her jaw. Well, sometimes the majority is misguided. This neighborhood deserves better than cluttered bike racks, but apparently, I'm the only one who cares. With that, she brushed past me, her footsteps echoing in the corridor. I watched her go, a knot of conflicting feelings in my chest. On one hand, we'd won. On the other, it felt like a hollow victory to see how bitterly she clung to her convictions. A part of me couldn't understand why someone would invest so much energy in controlling small aspects of other people's lives. But that was Karen, unwavering in her sense of moral superiority, no matter how many people disagreed. Despite Barbara's hostility, our Cycling for Health group continued to thrive. We turned our initial success into a platform for broader activities. Rena organized a weekend group ride through the nearby trails, inviting both experienced and novice cyclists. It was a fun, relaxing outing. Neighbors pedaled side by side, chatting and laughing, discovering corners of the suburban landscape they'd never explored. Donald took the lead on creating a monthly e-newsletter. It featured cycling tips, upcoming local bike events, and stories from residents about how cycling had improved their daily routines. The newsletter was surprisingly popular, even among some older residents who read it for pure curiosity. We also expanded our petition into a general statement of community solidarity. Neighbors could sign to support the principle that no major decisions about shared amenities, like the bike rack, should happen without significant resident input. Over time, a sense of empowerment spread among us. People realized they had a voice, that the HOA didn't have to be an unassailable authority. In quiet ways, this sense of unity pushed back against other trivial restrictions Barbara had championed in the past. For example, one neighbor who loved to plant flowers on her balcony no longer worried about the color of her pots. Another who'd been fretting over the height of a small lawn decoration found moral support from his neighbors. A new attitude was blossoming. We all live here, so we should shape our environment together. Meanwhile, Barbara found herself increasingly isolated. Though she still held the vice president's seat on the HOA, the rest of the board had grown wary of her aggressive proposals. Roger, the HOA president, began reaching out more to residents before board votes, ensuring that the fiasco with the bike racks wouldn't repeat itself. Word also spread that Barbara had tried to recruit a new HOA member aligned with her views, but no one showed interest. One by one, her usual allies distanced themselves, unwilling to be part of a losing battle or to alienate the majority of neighbors. At times, she posted inflammatory comments on the HOA's message board, criticizing any perceived laxity in enforcing rules. These messages, however, often went unanswered or received pushback from multiple residents, citing the same community principle. We prefer collaboration over confrontation. Despite this social chill, Barbara seemed unyielding. She kept up a facade of authority, still marched through the corridors with her shoulders squared, still scanned for infractions like a neighborhood watch commander. But it was a hollow performance. The leverage she once wielded had slipped through her fingers the day the board voted against her bike rack proposal. It was a bittersweet development to watch. Though our group had effectively taken away her power to harass cyclists, part of me felt a pang of empathy. I couldn't imagine living with so much anger, dedicating so much energy to meddling in others' choices. Yet there was no reaching out to her. Any attempt at friendly conversation seemed to escalate into a lecture about community standards. So we coexisted in an uneasy truce, acknowledging her presence but refusing to let her reclaim the narrative she'd once monopolized. Just when our group thought we'd fully neutralized the bike rack threat, an unexpected problem arose. A series of small bike thefts occurred in the parking garage. 3 residents reported that their bike seats were missing, another found his tires slashed, and a 5th discovered his entire bicycle had vanished. Instantly, a wave of anxiety flooded the community. Conspiracy theories abounded. Some whispered that Barbara might be behind it, seeking to justify her claims about security risks. But there was no evidence. Others blamed teenagers or an opportunistic thief who had discovered easy pickings in the garage. In an emergency meeting, Roger addressed the thefts. The security cameras, ironically, had dead spots in certain corners, and the footage from around the times of theft was inconclusive. He proposed installing additional cameras and better lighting, measures that the board swiftly approved. But the damage to residents' sense of security was done. Barbara, of course, seized the moment. If the bikes weren't clogging the garage, this wouldn't be happening, she crowed at the meeting, an undercurrent of "I told you so" in her voice. At least in a distant lot, we could fence off the area more efficiently. Donald stood up in the middle of her speech. Karen, we all know theft can happen anywhere. Putting the bikes in a remote lot wouldn't solve anything. It might even make theft easier because the area would be less visible. Let's focus on real solutions, like improved surveillance. A hush fell on the crowd. Barbara's cheeks reddened, but she didn't retort. With more neighbors informed than ever about the actual pros and cons, her argument gained no traction. Still, the thefts rattled us. Would they embolden Barbara to renew her push? We braced for another round of wrangling, hoping the new security measures would fix the problem before it could be twisted into a fresh justification for relocation. As the HOA quickly approved the installation of extra cameras and motion-activated lights, our cycling group rallied in a different way. We organized a rotating check-in schedule. Volunteer neighbors took short shifts throughout the week, casually passing by the bike rack areas and keeping an eye out for suspicious activity. No one was asked to confront anyone. We weren't vigilantes. But an occasional friendly presence, we reasoned, might deter any mischief. I took the late Sunday afternoon slot. During my check-in, I strolled around, greeting a few neighbors who were parking cars or unlocking their bikes. In the corners, the new cameras glinted quietly, red lights blinking. Sure enough, the theft stopped as soon as the security measures went live. When the board reported at the next meeting that no further incidents had been recorded, the community breathed a collective sigh of relief. Donald joked that Barbara had lost her last argument for banishing bikes, and Rena teased him to keep such jibes to himself, lest we stir up her wrath unnecessarily. Meanwhile, Cycling for Health kept flourishing. We organized our first official fun ride for kids, complete with a small obstacle course to teach them safe riding. Parents showed up in droves, some filming the event on their phones. Everyone left in high spirits, remarking on how the sense of community was stronger than it had been in years. That Sunday evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I marveled at how far we'd come. From a tiny group of frustrated cyclists to an organized, vibrant part of our condo complex's social tapestry. In the process, we'd inadvertently pulled back the curtain on the HOA's mechanics, revealing that no one individual, no matter how loud or bossy, could dictate the rules if enough people stood together. One morning, about a month after we'd secured victory for the bike racks, a note slipped under my door. For a second, I felt that old anxiety, half expecting another cease and desist letter from Barbara. But when I picked it up, it turned out to be a courteous invitation from Roger, the HOA president, requesting that I join the next board meeting for a discussion about community engagement initiatives. Curious, I called the number provided. Roger explained that the board was impressed with how our group mobilized residents and wanted to explore ways the HOA could foster more positive community involvement, everything from local sports clubs to volunteer-run events. He wanted my input, given that I'd led Cycling for Health. I was floored. Growing up, I'd always seen HOAs as top-down organizations that told residents what to do. Yet here was our board, wanting to learn from us. I agreed to attend, feeling a swelling sense of pride for our collective achievements. Word quickly spread. Rena and Donald teased me about my HOA cameo. Jokes aside, I recognized the opportunity. If the board truly wanted to collaborate, we could shape the future of our community to be more inclusive, more participatory. And if we made sure to keep the lines of communication open, maybe we could thwart future attempts by Barbara to push draconian rules on unsuspecting neighbors. When I arrived at the board meeting that evening, I found the atmosphere surprisingly welcoming. A few other residents who had initiated small community projects, like a gardening club and a book exchange, were there as well. In front of us sat the full HOA board, with Barbara at the far end of the table, arms folded and gaze fixed on a spot on the wall. Roger introduced me to those who didn't already know me. We're here tonight to discuss ways the HOA can collaborate with resident initiatives instead of seeing them as outside influences, he said, glancing meaningfully at Barbara. We'd like to encourage more events like the Children's Cycling Clinic or the gardening group's community vegetables stand. My heart pounded, but I spoke up. Thank you for the invitation. In my experience, Neighbors respond positively when they feel a sense of ownership. If the HOA recognized and supported these groups, we could build an even stronger sense of community. One board member nodded enthusiastically. Yes, we're thinking about a simple system for residents to propose events, request modest funds if needed, and share resources without jumping through excessive hoops. Barbara twitched at the mention of funds, but remained silent. I pitched a few ideas: a monthly block party in the summer, a neighborhood bulletin for skill sharing, and an annual health fair to highlight local activities like cycling, running, or yoga. The gardening group leader suggested a composting program. The board members seemed genuinely open to these ideas, and we spent nearly an hour brainstorming. Though Barbara never joined the conversation, her aloofness spoke volumes. The board was moving in a direction that valued collaboration, which ran counter to her usual pattern of top-down micromanagement. By the end of the meeting, Roger thanked us and promised to draft a plan for more structured collaboration between the HOA and resident initiatives. Walking out, I noticed Barbara hurrying toward the parking lot. Part of me felt a pang of guilt. She was undeniably alone in that room. Yet every time we tried to include her, she'd either brush us off or turn antagonistic. Still, I couldn't help hoping that one day she might find a healthier way to be involved. For now, at least, the community was evolving, regardless of whether Karen came along. Summer rolled into fall, the crisp air whispering change. The board's new community engagement plan, dubbed Neighbors United, took shape. The first official event was a fall harvest festival in late October, bringing together families for a pumpkin carving contest, a bake sale, and a guided bike ride to admire the turning leaves. A week before the festival, rumors circulated that Barbara was furious about the board spending HOA funds, albeit a small amount, on festival decorations and safety signs for the bike ride. People whispered that she was planning to challenge the budget at the next meeting. Sure enough, on the eve of the festival, Barbara made her move. She called an impromptu board session, which, per the bylaws, required at least 1 day's notice. I received an abrupt email from the HOA's office. Emergency meeting. HOA budget misallocation. The subject alone made me roll my eyes. That evening, a small group of us congregated again in the community center. Barbara dominated the table, her voice icy with indignation. She claimed the board had overstepped by funding frivolous parties and bike signage, suggesting it was a waste of the residents' fees. She had printed spreadsheets, though the numbers were distorted to highlight every penny spent on cycling for health or the upcoming festival. Roger held up the actual budget breakdown. Barbara, the total allocation for the event is less than 1% of our discretionary spending. It's well within the guidelines, and we've done this before for holiday parties and the summer barbecue. Her lips tightened. You're letting special interest groups drain the coffers. This festival is a blatant show of favoritism toward a handful of cyclists. I couldn't hold back anymore. Karen, this festival is for everyone. Families, gardeners, readers, cyclists, even folks who just want to carve a pumpkin. It's not about any single group. It's about coming together as a community. She glared daggers at me, then turned to the board. I move that we halt any further spending on this event until we can conduct a thorough audit. The board went into a brief huddle. Then Roger sighed. We have no evidence of misallocation or wrongdoing. The event is within budget. We're not halting anything. This meeting is adjourned. A hush fell. Barbara slammed her folder shut, face red with anger. People around the room exhaled in relief. No one said a word as she marched out, footsteps echoing down the hallway. Perhaps that was her final gambit, accusing the board of wrongdoing to stop the festival. But it had failed. This time, no one, not even the mildest board members, sided with her. The morning of the festival arrived crisp and bright. Orange and red leaves skittered across the sidewalks. Volunteers had decorated the community courtyard with hay bales and pumpkins, while the air filled with the sweet smell of apple cider. Families and neighbors mingled, laughing, trading recipes for pumpkin pie or marveling at each other's creative carving designs. Cycling for Health set up a small booth near the entrance, handing out pamphlets on bicycle safety and leading a short guided ride around the block. People of all ages participated, some wobbly but determined, others confidently pedaling through the crunchy leaves. Rena gave a brief talk about the benefits of regular exercise, encouraging everyone to incorporate more physical activity into their lives. Children swarmed around her, fascinated by the bikes. Donald was taking pictures to include in our next newsletter. He captured smiling faces, parents, seniors, teens, even a few pets in costumes. It was the most vibrant, warm-hearted event our complex had seen in years. Roger, strolling among the booths, expressed amazement at the turnout. I knew it would be good, but this is remarkable, he said, sipping hot cider. I didn't see Barbara anywhere. Some said she'd chosen to stay indoors with her blinds shut, presumably seething at the success of a festival she'd tried to sabotage. Others speculated she might have gone out of town. In truth, no one missed her. The festival blossomed without the slightest whiff of negativity or confrontation. As the day wound down, people helped each other tidy up. No one demanded that we return the courtyard to pristine condition instantly. We all cooperated. The spirit of mutual respect and enjoyment lingered well after the last booths were dismantled, leaving behind a sense of genuine togetherness. Winter settled in, blanketing our condo complex with a layer of calm. The festive spirit carried over even after the Fall Harvest Festival. The HOA board, inspired by the success, scheduled a holiday lights competition and a neighborhood New Year potluck. Neighbors seemed happier and more connected than ever. Meanwhile, Barbara's influence waned. She still patrolled the halls, no doubt searching for rule violations, but her interactions with others grew terse and infrequent. People learned to politely nod and continue on their way, not giving her any fresh ammunition for gossip. Over time, her complaints on the message board dwindled to small gripes: an improperly stacked recycling bin here, a stray piece of trash there. One snowy afternoon, I was locking up my bike in the underground garage when I noticed Barbara standing by her car, fiddling with her trunk. Our eyes met, and though my first instinct was to look away, I decided to offer a brief nod in greeting. She surprised me by speaking first. "How's your group?" she asked, her tone no longer dripping with disdain. I swallowed. "We're doing well. Actually, we're planning a winter ride when the roads are clear." She frowned slightly, but her features didn't contort into the usual hostility. There was a pause, and then she spoke softly. "I realize people seem to like these events. Maybe it's not all bad." For a moment, I wasn't sure how to reply. This was the closest thing to an olive branch I'd seen from her. I nodded. "If you ever want to join us, or if you have suggestions for how we could be more helpful, let me know." She gave a curt nod back, not exactly a smile, but something less severe than before. Then she turned and closed her trunk. "You take care, now," she said. And with that, she walked away, leaving me standing there, surprised yet oddly relieved. It wasn't a grand reconciliation, but it was a thaw in the frost. Perhaps Barbara recognized that the community was happier and more vibrant when people worked together. Or maybe she's simply tired of fighting. In any case, we'd won more than just a battle for a bike rack. We'd earned the freedom to shape our own community, forging a bond that no single meddling Karen could break. In the following weeks, as snow flurries gave way to the first signs of spring, cycling for health remained a fixture of neighborhood life. We rode together, we laughed together, and we remained ever vigilant against any efforts to undermine our sense of unity. The complex felt alive with purpose, residents looking after one another, the board supporting new initiatives, and even the occasional half-smile from Barbara, who seemed to be learning, however slowly, that not everything had to be a battle. In the end, the bicycle racks stayed right where they belonged, convenient and safe, a symbol of what a united neighborhood could accomplish. And the best part? Our story ended on a note of hope, proving that even in the most tightly regulated, sometimes frustrating corners of suburban America, a group of determined neighbors can make all the difference, transforming conflict into community and forging an environment where everyone, even the fiercest Karen, might just discover a softer place to stand.